Busted. Donald Trump has been caught red-handed, flagrantly violating the law in a desperate bid to win the messaging war over the government shutdown that he initiated, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have a couple of clips to look at here and some articles to look at as well, but the bottom line is this, as this MSNBC headline notes, Trump's partisan shutdown emails break the law, according to top oversight Democrat, as well as ethics experts of a nonpartisan variety. We'll get to that. I want to give you some examples before we do a deep dive. Again, Politico is corroborating this. Government agencies are blaming the shutdown on Democrats. Ethics experts say this could be against the law. So to give you some examples, okay, before we dive into the mechanics of it and some clips in which even reporters are calling Mike Johnson out and other Republicans out on this flagrant violation of what is called the Hatch Act. Trump administration instructs federal workers to leave out-of-office message blaming shutdown on Democrats. That's one example. As Mediaite reports, the Trump administration has instructed federal employees to set up their out-of-office email messages to blame Democratic senators for the government shutdown, according to reporting from ABC News. Capitol Hill correspondent Jay O'Brien reported on the text of an email template provided in advance to furloughed Labor Department employees. Quote, this is a text. Unfortunately, Democratic senators are blocking passage of H.R. 5371 in the Senate, which has led to a lapse in appropriations. Due to the lapse in appropriations, I am currently in furlough status. I will respond to emails once government functions resume. Departments of Justice employees told ABC News they received message templates with similar language. In addition, some furloughed federal employees at the Department of Education said their out-of-office replies were automatically reset to blame Democrats. In other words, when they were furloughed and they had to leave and they set their own out-of-office message, somebody on Trump's orders went in and reworked their out-of-office message to explicitly partisanly blame Democrats, which is something we've never seen before under the Biden administration, under the Obama administration, under the Clinton administration. This is a staggering escalation, and again, we'll get into how it violates the law, but I just need to provide these examples first. Quote, they did it after everyone left. One education department staffer told ABC News, adding, quote, I'm so pissed. Some federal departments did not send any out-of-office email guidance, ABC News reported. When ABC News emailed the White House press office Wednesday, an automatic response said, quote, due to staff shortages resulting from the Democrat shutdown, the typical 24/7 monitoring of this press inbox may be experience delays. As you wait for a response, please remember this could have been avoided if the white Democrats voted for a clean continuing resolution to keep the government open. Several federal workers told ABC that they were concerned that adding the messages to their email accounts would violate the Hatch Act, which prohibits federal employees from engaging in political activities during their official duties. That's the key law in this. Representative Robert Garcia, the top Democrat in the House Oversight Committee, wrote the Office of Special Counsel to investigate the, quote, blatant violation of the law. And we'll get to that, okay? Another example. We're just going to type this in here. We're going to go to HUD.gov. That's the Agency for Housing and Urban Development, okay? So we're going to go to HUD.gov, and you get a pop-up immediately. The radical left in Congress shut down the government. HUD will use available resources to help Americans in need. It's not even just a banner. It's a pop-up. So then you close the pop-up, and then right there at the top in aggressive red, in MAGA red, it repeats the message. In very tiny font, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And then in big font, the radical left in Congress shut down the government. HUD will use every available resource to help Americans in need. This is shocking, shockingly flagrant, okay? And it's so bad that even the both sides right-leaning media is calling it out. So this is Mike Johnson being pressed about this earlier today.
Oh. HUD had on its agency webpage blaming radical Democrats for this. Is that an appropriate use of taxpayer money being overtly political? It's something we haven't seen before.
I think what the HUD website says is the objective truth that we're telling you right now. There are 44 Democrats in the Senate, and by the way, every Democrat in the House except one who voted to shut the government down. They are the ones that made that decision. The White House and the executive branch take no pleasure in this. But when they are tasked with determining what their priorities are, obviously they're going to follow their principles and priorities and not the other team. That's the results of an election that everybody voted in, the popular election in Electoral College.
So, Mike Johnson, of course, being the feckless coward that he is, well, you know, it's just the truth. It's not the truth. But even if it were the truth, it's still a blatant, egregious violation of the Hatch Act. just as it would have been if Democrats attempted to do this when Republicans attempted shutdowns under President Clinton, President Obama, and President Biden. Okay, it would be shocking. It would be despicable. Or if congressional websites were changed during the last Trump shutdown, in which Trump controlled the White House but had to deal either with a Democratic minority or a Democratic majority in Congress. Imagine if Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, okay, we're changing the congressional website to put in big, bold letters that Donald Trump triggered the shutdown. You think Trump would be pissed about that? You don't think that there'd be investigations into Hatch Act violations then? It's so bad that even Chris Cuomo, whom I've lost a lot of respect for, quite candidly, over the years because he's become more of a both sideser, even Chris Cuomo is calling out Trump administration officials.
I'm not used to seeing naked political propaganda on a government website. Are you worried about this violating the Hatch Act?
No, sir, we're not worried at all. And this is not about propaganda, Chris. This is just about letting the American people know what's going on. But we really need to be talking about how this government shutdown impacts the American people.
I want to do that, but this is part of the impact, right? I mean, when you're saying the radical left is shutting it down and they're doing it for $1.5 trillion for illegals, that's not true, Secretary Turner. That's why I'm bringing it up, because it's propaganda.
Well, you know what, though, Chris, you look at this, and I've heard all the cries and the outcry and people saying this is propaganda, that it's a violation of the Hatch Act. You know, to me, the Democrats and the far left are using this as a distraction to really deflect from what's really important here, and that's how it's been irresponsible actions on the Hill, and American people are being impacted greatly by this government shutdown.
Which is why Donald Trump should negotiate with Democrats. If you need Democratic votes, you're obligated to negotiate, period. That was the expectation during the Biden administration. Hey, if Republicans have leverage, they have a right to ask for concessions. Now, again, as somebody who does not like Donald Trump, who thinks he's an authoritarian, who opposes this government, even I acknowledge that because Republicans are in majorities, Democrats can't get whatever they want. There's a limit to what they can ask for. I understand that in terms of negotiations, but this idea that you can just give them the finger and give nothing is patently absurd. And so, no, this is on Donald Trump and the Republicans. Jasmine Crockett, Democratic superstar, also addressed the Hatch Act violations, the flagrant violations of the law by the Trump administration here.
You know, it's very quiet here on Capitol Hill tonight. What we've seen, though, from the White House is not silence. They are actually, using all of their government websites to say this is Democrats pushing this shutdown. I think we can show you some of those websites showing these messages, blaming Democrats for this shutdown, HUD, DOJ, State Department, Agriculture. Do you think that they're being more effective in their messaging in terms of putting this blame on Democrats?
I think they're being a lot more illegal in their messaging. The first thing that I wanted to know was, how can this not be a violation of the Hatch Act in some way, right? Because we are not allowed to politic on official sites, period, right? And that's what they're doing. They literally change official government websites to put out their propaganda. Instead of just saying we're currently in a shutdown, you decided to play partisan politics on an official website. And I guess there is no limit to what they won't do, because they do the exact same thing when we walk into committee. Instead of us having real committee hearings where we are actually able to get information that may somehow help the American people understand what's going on, instead it's always a campaign rally.
It is. That's very true. And good on Jasmine Crockett for being allowed a countervailing voice against this BS by the Trump administration. So let's take a look in some articles breaking this down. Government agencies are blaming the shutdown on Democrats. Ethics experts say it could be against the law. This is Politico, center-right publication. Handfuls of agencies posted statements to their websites Wednesday, alerting the American people that the government has officially shut down and that the radical left is responsible. Agencies across the federal government are explicitly blaming Democrats for the government shutdown, from banners on top of public websites to suggested out-of-office messages for federal employees, in an unusually overt show of partisan messaging that some ethics experts say may violate the federal law. The deluge of statements bashing Democrats began hours before the shutdown today, with a single red pop-up posted to the HUD website. The shutdown would, quote, inflict massive pain on the American people unless they get their $1.5 trillion wish list of demands. The Trump administration wants to keep the government open for the American people. By Wednesday morning, handfuls of other agencies had already followed suit, alerting the Americans that the government had already shut down, or officially shut down, and that Donald Trump's political rivals were responsible. Quote, Democrats have shut down the government, reads a banner lining the top of the Department of Justice website. Let's take a look there. Yep, sure enough, Department of Justice website. Democrats have shut down the government. The Department of Justice websites are currently not being regularly updated. Quote, President Trump has made it clear he wants the government open and support those who feed, fuel, and clothe the American people, a message on the Department of Agriculture website says, but that the government was closed, quote, due to radical left Democrat shutdown. And in an email obtained by Politico, the Small Business Administration circulated a template for automated out-of-office emails for furloughed employees, encouraging workers to adopt the messaging placing responsibility for the shutdown on Democrats, which is similar to what we read from Mediaite. Government agencies informing the public of a shutdown is not unusual, but the overtly partisan blame game from federal agencies is. The flood of statements is the most concerted push from the Trump administration to admonish Democratic lawmakers for opposing a GOP continuing resolution that Republicans saw as the final off-ramp to avoid a shutdown. Democrats have argued that they were left out of negotiations and that they would vote to fund the government if Republicans agreed to extending ACA subsidies. Government ethics experts are sounding the alarm on the flood of finger-pointing, saying the explicit blaming of Democrats violates laws prohibiting partisan messaging or political lobbying within federal agencies. Quote, it's a coordinated effort in the executive branch to have all the agencies push Congress to get the Democrats to cave, and they're using their employees and putting pressure on their employees, said Richard Painter, a longtime critic of Trump and professor at the University of Minnesota Law School who studies government ethics. He was also a White House ethics lawyer in the Republican Bush administration. So again, not a liberal. Quote, they're not telling the employees to call the Democrats in Congress and stop the shutdown, but this appears to be a lobbying effort targeting Congress. Painter specifically pointed to the Anti-Lobbying Act, which prohibits the use of appropriated funds for lobbying activities designed to, quote, support or defeat legislation pending before Congress. He said the messages also, quote, push the boundaries on the Hatch Act, which limits political activities of federal employees who work with federally funded programs, but stops short of an overt violation. He said the administration's statements could violate the Hatch Act if they start referring to campaigns of the 2026 election. Donald Sherman, the executive director and chief counsel at CREW, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, which also has been regularly critical of the Trump administration, said that while the messages don't, quote, technically violate the Hatch Act, they overstep a legal obligation for agency employees to, quote, provide nonpartisan service to their constituents. Quote, a government shutdown causes stress for the public regardless of political affiliation. It is wildly inappropriate for agency leadership to politicize the situation and blame political enemies. After seeing the messages posted to HUD's website Tuesday, Craig Holman, a lobbyist on government ethics with nonprofit Public Citizens, which also has clashed with Trump, said he files a Hatch Act complaint against HUD Secretary Scott Turner and plans to file similar complaints against each agency who has posted partisan messages. Quote, each agency that participates and promotes this political game is in violation of the Hatch Act. A spokesman for the Office of Special Counsel, the agency that enforces the Hatch Act, replied with an automated response to a request for comment. The spokesperson email did not mention the Democratic Party. Quote, I am out of the office due to a lapse in appropriations and will respond in turn, which is the sort of, non-partisan language you expect. Let's see here. Some other articles I want to take a look at before we look at Garcia's response. The inclusion of overly political messaging, this is from NPR, in federal agency communications raised immediate alarm bells for some federal workers and ethics experts. They said it could violate the Hatch Act, which prohibits civil servants in the executive branch from engaging in most political activity inside federal buildings or while on duty. Quote, this correspondence from federal government officials could be considered a violation of the Hatch Act, said Michael Fallings, a partner at Tully Rickney, an employment law firm, said in a statement. Quote, the Hatch Act prohibits engaging in political activity while in an official capacity, including communication that contains advocacy in opposition to a political party. Here, while the reference to Democrats alone likely does not constitute a violation, the explicit blaming of the Democratic Party for the shutdown and reference to the radical left may constitute a violation. But the Code of Ethics that requires federal employees to serve, the Code of Ethics requires that federal employees serve the American people impartially without regard for their political views. This message may not technically violate the Hatch Act since it does not advocate for particular candidates or weigh in on certain elections, but it certainly violates the spirit of that law, said Donald Sherman, executive director and chief counsel of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, a liberal nonprofit ethics watchdog group. Quote, a shutdown will cause stress for the public regardless of political affiliation. Agency leadership's job in this moment is to provide nonpartisan service to their constituents, not politicize the situation and blame political enemies. Quote, we just all accept that the Hatch Act is null and void, one federal worker who requested anonymity because they fear retaliation from the Trump administration told NPR, quote, nothing matters. Watchdog group files Hatch Act complaint over the federal agencies blaming Democrats for the shutdown. This is reported by The Hill. Public Citizen filed the complaint late Wednesday against Kelly Loeffler, administrator of the Small Business Administration, and Scott Turner, head of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The filing with the Office of Special Counsel argues the text at each agency violates the Hatch Act, which prohibits federal employees, including cabinet members, from electioneering while at work. Let's see here. And now let's get to Garcia, the Democratic oversight member. Trump's partisan shutdown emails break the law, says top oversight Democrat. Garcia thinks the Trump administration is in, quote, blatant violation of the law for, quote, misuse of taxpayer dollars for political purposes over partisan agency guidance offered to government employees during the shutdown. And Garcia wants his Office of Special Counsel to investigate. Quote, I write regarding the Trump administration's apparent violations of the Hatch Act and illegal use of government resources to promote a false, partisan Republican political agenda. He wrote in a letter to the Office of Special Counsel. Garcia references multiple agencies that have pushed public and private communications blaming Democrats for the ongoing shutdown, messages that potentially violate a law called the Hatch Act. Of course, we've discussed. The letter, addressed to OSC acting head Jamison Greer, who also serves as the U.S. Trade Representative, ties this latest inquiry to broader investigations into, quote, attempts by the administration to leverage federal power to advance partisan political ends, including recent efforts to censor prominent critics of Donald Trump. Garcia goes on to deem the possible Hatch Act violations as part of a, quote, pattern of abuse and politicization of executive branch agencies, vowing to, quote, to investigate fully. He asked the OSC to immediately investigate, quote, these likely violations of federal law and to provide a staff-level briefing, quote, in which you provide detailed information of how you plan to address the administration's actions no later than October 16th, 2025. So who knows what will happen? Jamison Greer is a partisan appointee of Donald Trump, who's a trade representative and also simultaneously the head of the Office of Special Counsel. It's entirely possible they don't take this up, but this is another reason why it's important in the 2026 midterms to give Democrats as much power as possible in the House of Representatives and the Senate, hopefully winning back both so that they can probe the Trump administration for these flagrant violations of the law. We've never seen anything like this. And the last thing I'll say is this. We should not, this is disgusting, it's despicable, but this is where Democrats have to get a grasp of imagination. Donald Trump will break the law, will bend the law, will twist the law, and will engage in overt acts of politicization. And Democrats need to start understanding that when they get back into power, they have to re-examine their relationship with the state as well. Republicans look at the state as a tool to push a partisan political agenda. And if that's the case, and there's no undoing that, there's no unringing that bell, then Democrats actually have to start doing the same thing. Democrats also have to start looking at the state as something to push a partisan political advantage, which just so happens to advantage including conservatives and conservative voters. But we can't have this asymmetry where Republicans can put, Trump's name on checks and stuff like that, and Democrats don't do. Even President Biden admitted he should have put his name on the fucking checks that came out from the American Rescue Plan, like Donald Trump did with COVID stimulus before. I understand a lot of people think that's tacky, and I agree. But if those are the rules of the game, and if that stays in the mind of the American people, oh, Donald Trump paid me money during COVID. Thank you, Donald Trump. But Biden did even more. He just didn't put his name on it because that would be tacky. Democrats have to get with the program and start playing the game of politics on a more symmetrical terrain. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.